Assalamu alaikum viewers. My name is Aleena Chaudhary and I'm going to read you a story called Peter Rabbit, written by Beatrix Potter. Once upon a time, there were 4 little rabbits, Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail and Peter. They lived with their mother in a sandbank underneath the roof of a very big tree. "Now, my dears," said Miss Rabbit one morning, "you may go into the fields or down the lane, but don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there. He was put in a pie by Mrs. McGregor. Now run along and don't get into mischief. I'm going out." Then Mrs. Rabbit took a basket and her umbrella and went through the wood to the baker's. She brought a loaf of brown bread and 5 currant buns. Flopsy, Mopsy and Cottontail, who were good little bunnies, went down the lane together to gather blackberries. But Peter, who was very naughty, ran straight away to Mr. McGregor's garden and squeezed under the gate. First, he ate some lettuces and some beets, and he ate some radishes, and then, feeling rather sick, he went to look for some parsley. But round the end of a cucumber frame, whom should he meet but Mr. McGregor? Mr. McGregor was on his hands and knees planting out young cabbages, but he jumped up and ran after Peter, waving a rake and calling out, "Stop, thief!" Peter was frightened. He rushed all over the garden, for he had forgotten the way back to the gate. He had lost one shoe among the cabbages and the other amongst the potatoes. After losing them, he ran on 4 legs and went faster, so that I think he might have got away altogether if he had not run into a gooseberry net and got caught by the buttons on his jacket. It was a blue jacket with brass buttons, quite new. Peter gave himself up for lost and shed tears, but his sobs were overheard by some sparrows, who flew to him in excitement and implored him to exert himself. Mr. McGregor came up with a sieve, which he intended to pop on the top of Peter, but Peter wriggled out just in time, leaving his jacket behind him. He rushed into the shed and jumped into a can. It would have been a beautiful thing to hide in if it had not had so much water in it. Mr. McGregor was quite sure that Peter was somewhere in the shed, perhaps hidden underneath a flower pot. He began to turn them carefully, looking under each. Peter sneezed, "Curty-shoo!" Mr. McGregor was after him in no time and tried to put his foot upon Peter, who jumped out of a window, upsetting 3 plants. Peter sat down to rest. He was out of breath and trembling with fright, and he had no idea which way to go. Also, he was damp with sitting in that can. After a time, he began to wonder about going very fast and looking all around. He found a door in a wall, but it was locked and there was no room for a rabbit to squeeze underneath. A mouse was running in and out over the doorstep, carrying peas and beans to her family in the wood. Peter asked her a way to the gate, but she had a pea in her mouth. She couldn't answer. She only shook her head at him. Peter began to cry. Then he tried to find his way straight across the garden, but he became puzzled. He came to a pond where Mr. McGregor filled his water cans. A cat was staring at some goldfish. She sat very still, but now and then the tip of her tail twitched as if it was alive. Peter thought it best to go away without speaking to her. He had heard about cats from his cousin Benjamin Bunny. He went back towards the shed, but quite close to him he heard a scratchy noise. Peter scuttered underneath the bushes, but as nothing happened, he came out and climbed upon a wheelbarrow and peeped over. The first thing he saw, Mr. McGregor hoeing onions. His back was turned towards Peter, and beyond him was the gate. Peter got down off the wheelbarrow and started running as fast as he could go along a straight walk behind some bushes. Mr. McGregor caught sight of him at the corner, but Peter didn't care. He slipped underneath the gate and was safe at last in the wood outside the garden. Mr. McGregor hung up the little jacket and the shoes for the scarecrow to frighten the blackbirds. Peter never stopped running or looked behind him till he got home to the big tree. He was so tired that he flopped down upon the sand on the floor of a rabbit hole and shut his eyes. His mother was busy cooking. She wondered what he had done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and pair of shoes that Peter lost in a fortnight. I'm sorry to say that Peter was not very well during the evening. His mother put him to bed and made him some chamomile tea, and she gave a dose of it to Peter. 1 teaspoon to be taken at bedtime. But Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail had bread, milk, and blackberries for supper. The end. I hope you enjoy my story. Don't forget to watch, like, and add good feedback. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe ZMC TV.